years old, and from those girls who were 3 times more likely to acquire HIV. So these are serious health effects that are affecting our children of the world. And it also explains mental health issues and the fact that girls are more likely to suffer from health issues when they are child brides, when they go through early pregnancy, or when they suffer from economical hardship.
And this is just a picture of the Convention of the Rights of Child, because every child in the world has one thing in common: their rights. The CRC, as we were quoting a lot of their articles. So they've been a huge part of why children are getting the help that they need, even though it's not enough. The United Nations, children represent 20% of victims worldwide. And what they found was that most of them are not transnational. So usually when they find them, it's within the nation that they're from. So it's intra-regional, which is an interesting fact. That normally we assume that they just come from all over the world, right? That's more for child labor, not for child sex trafficking. And the member states, 194 countries have ratified the Convention of Rights of Child, but as previously mentioned, the governments must protect children from sexual exploitation and make certain that they are not abducted, sold, and trafficked. That's both Article 34 and Article 35. Every 10,000 child trafficking victims, one gains any kind of redress. So that means that, like, restitution, reparation of any kind, any sort of justice. So that number needs to be way higher. And 1 out of every 100 is realized as a victim, meaning often, like the officer said in the video previously, that they are victims, even though they often get tried as convicts, which is really distressing to think about, because they need the help and they're not getting it. Also with that, because nations do not have legal documents nor the determination to follow through politically, and many governments worldwide obstruct organizations from collecting data, like organizations like the UN or like Polaris or things of that nature, like an NGO or an international organization. So the protocol that they all follow is suppress and punish traffickers and persons is the world's primary legal instrument to combat human trafficking. But let's take a look at the identities of victims and traffickers. Traffickers target runaways or homeless youth. They have experienced abuse, which includes victims of war and those who are socially discriminated against. That said, the LGBTQ youth make up a large portion of sex trafficking within the US. Even more alarming, like Kimberly said, traffickers tend to be someone the victim knows. They're non-strangers, which means they're family members, intimate partners, friends, or acquaintances. And that's why it's so hard for these child victims to recover, because they're taught to trust these people that are taught how to teach them how to love, and they essentially learn their ability to trust themselves because they're gauging people incorrectly and others. So it becomes insidious and like an uphill battle almost, that's why they have the suicidal ideation and depression long after, and PTSD. This is a map of the exploitation around the world, and when we look at the pink we can see that that's sexual exploitation, which is what we want to focus on because that's what we covered. The little girls are sex trafficked in East Asia and the Pacific, and in North Africa and the Middle East, as well as little boys. And the Central America, girls are there. And in Western and Southern Europe, there's boys and girls trafficked there, sexually trafficked there. So we scroll down further. So multilateral organizations above the national level tend to be more specific in who they help. But that said, I did a report, or I found this source that said in France they only have 2 separate departments, and when you call to report a claim, it can go to one department or the other, and there's no department specifically for child sex trafficking. There's only adult sex trafficking, or what's the other one? Only adult trafficking department or child labor trafficking department. So the argument there is that there needs to be more classification and obviously more retraining within these departments, so they can better tackle the issue at hand. On top of that, lawyers in France only get 15 minutes with asylum seekers when they interview them from the detention centers, but it's over the phone and with an interpreter. But so that means that diminishes the time for the lawyer to really get a feel of the victim and for them to even hint at, that they're under sexual exploitation, or for them to even gauge them. I mean, it makes it like a million times harder. This picture is of the Rohingya community. A lot of girls in these refugee camps are getting trafficked over there. And also, this is a chant from the Malaysian girls because they're trying to combat child marriage legislatively. So I kind of brought a tear to my eye playing it. So in short, NGOs and intergovernmental agencies are helping, but more departments need retraining, and it's an important step in stopping child trafficking. Additionally, there's a universal tip line according to the US Department of State. I guess it can be accessed internationally, but I listed also the text-free, be-free hotline number and the national hotline there.
Hi, I will be talking about human trafficking under the framework of economic inequality or social inequality, which are terms that are used interchangeably. The United Nations believe that at the very heart of social justice problems, including child sex trafficking, is inequality. And they define inequality as the state of not being equal, especially in regards to status, rights, and opportunities. And economic inequality means a lack of income or financial security, which affects one's living conditions. There's this long-held belief that economic growth eventually lifts all boats, but studies on this concept as an effect has largely been inconclusive. Recent studies now make it very clear that that income inequality is in fact detrimental for economic growth. We have the Venn diagram here by the Hope Now organization, which is an NGO that provides counsel and support for human trafficking. The diagram reflects the driving forces that create the perfect conditions for human trafficking to thrive. And here, these forces are grouped into three categories, which are socioeconomic, political, and global. The paper I'm about to discuss focuses on the socioeconomic factors, primarily poverty. Of course, there are other socioeconomic forces like gender inequality and discrimination. And the paper, the purpose of the paper that I'm on socioeconomic inequality is to talk about the issue under the broader framework of inequality. And their premise is that wherever socioeconomic inequality is pervasive, not only is poverty greatly increased and more widespread, but that the tendency to exploit and capitalize on those who have much less power becomes more imminent. And one of the more serious effects of this inequality is the global trade of underage youth for sex. And globalization has also been suggested as a reason for the widening inequality gap because it makes developing nations more dependent upon developed nations who buy their raw materials and labors very cheaply. Poverty makes children, especially females, more vulnerable to being lured with the promise of jobs, which is a predominant tactic used by sex traffickers. Some of the solutions addressing inequality, that address inequality to reduce human trafficking, child sex trafficking, is, well, first of all, global inequality is a central theme to promoting human rights. And this paper supports that establishing the correlation between inequality and human trafficking should be the focus, because overwhelming evidence indicates that rising inequality is the underlying cause of poverty with many negative implications. And the authors believe that providing direct services that address the victim's financial insecurity is one of the should be one of the main focuses for dealing with human trafficking. It will be one of the primary ways that need to be done to reduce human trafficking. So trafficking humans for exploitation is a global problem, and it is growing at an alarming rate. So it has to be dealt across the globe, and the solutions need to be collaborative and comprehensive and target that underlying cause of which is social inequality, economic inequality. Because governments who are unable to ensure that citizens have access to a decent income impels other aspects of social inequality, like a domino effect. The conditions that produce inequality are directly linked to trafficking, making it a very complex problem, and the mounting evidence should leave no room for doubt that these two issues are intertwined. Trafficking is such a complex problem that intervention and prevention programs, awareness campaigns, pursuing sex trafficking predators is not enough. Reducing the problem must involve combating poverty and economic insecurity on a large scale, and direct services to victims must include financial aid and access to residential services. Thank you.
So thank you for listening.